I understand why MAGA Republicans resent federal workers. Federal workers are highly educated Americans who, until recently, had secure jobs doing what they loved in exchange for a middle-class life and retirement. They were living the American dream we were all promised as kids. Go to school, work hard, and have the American dream. But for millions of Americans, that dream never came true, leaving them bitter and looking for someone to blame. So who's to blame? Just look at this chart here for a second. This is the balance of power of Congress over time. After the Great Depression from 1934 to 1996, the entire time Trump claims America was great the first time, Democrats controlled the House for 58 out of the 62 years, and the Senate for 52 out of those 62 years. And they used those decades of power and control to build labor unions, to guarantee good pay and benefits, to protect your rights as a worker, and to guarantee a safe workplace. The work Democrats did over those 60 years is the definition of the American dream we have today. And we did it all with a significantly lower economic output, because the wealth created from that economic output was taxed fairly. But Republican billionaires fought it the entire time. And after 60 years of losing, they knew they needed a new war, which is why in the 70s they created the Heritage Foundation, which then propped up an actor named Ronald Reagan. And they gave him a policy playbook called the Mandate for Leadership, which was basically the 1980 version of Project 2025. And Reagan immediately went to work for them with the trickle-down Reaganomics bullshit that destroyed the middle class and exploded the national debt, with the demonization of the federal workforce, and with new culture wars rooted in class.
Did y'all think it was a secret that racist people live and work in hiring all through corporate America? Ever since I started putting my racist white on job apps, I've received so many more callbacks. Somebody hired me to do the study. NBC, ABC, I'll do it. We need to expose the racists in corporate America because this is crazy, but it's already been known. Now, the job market is already tough, but especially as a minority in the job market, if you're looking for a job, yes. I don't care what they say, ATS system, oh, we don't see the race. Bullshit. Bullshit. It's a damn lie. You make it to the final round interview. Let's use me as an example, Kevin. And I'm going against Bob. Kevin, myself, more qualified, more experienced, killed the interview. Bob was just white. And he gets the job. And you're wondering, damn, I didn't get it. That's because there's racists in hiring. Racists in HR. HR is not a standardized process. Always remember that. HR is the only thing in corporate America that doesn't have a standardized process. It's whatever the recruiter feels like doing that day or at that company. So yes, there's racists all in corporate America, but they've infiltrated hiring.
In case it's unclear, you see the way the Doge folks roll up on these agencies, and they don't give prior notice. They roll up in there, they literally barge in there, they're disrespectful, and basically they inflict trauma on these federal employees and these federal bosses, okay? They don't treat them with any sort of respect. And that is par for the course for where a lot of these right-wingers, and honestly, a lot of the American public feels about federal workers. They look at federal workers as contempt. They sit there, they don't do anything, and that's the most secure job anybody can have, And so a lot of Americans, frankly, are like, that's good. Y'all feel y'all could just have one job and just retire. Your comfort rug dragged out from under you. That's good. Good for them. A lot of Americans feel that way. I'm telling you that. A federal job is one of the most secure jobs you can get out there. Okay? It's stable, has a lot of protections, it has pensions, you have 401ks, and you can't just get fired for no cause. It's not at will. The reason why there's not more of an uproar about what's going on, because as I said, a lot of people look at the federal government with a lot of contempt. They don't trust the federal government. And they look at the workers in the federal government, these people who are in federal government, like if they don't do anything, they're incompetent, they're sucking up all this money and all of this kind of stuff. And they don't do anything. They don't do anything worth anything. And the way these Doge people roll up in there, it's like fun for them. Look at how they're upset. It's like owning the libs. This is exuberant. This is exuberance that they go up in there with. The kind of cruelty they're going in there with is this kind of exuberance. The cruelty is the point. The terrorism is the point. The violence of their disrespect, the violence of their upturning of norms is the point. You know? They go up in there and they lock people out of the ring and deny them access to the system. You all ain't doing nothing anyway. Why do I have to add? Why do I have to give you prior permission? Y'all ain't doing shit anyway. And they've always wanted to destroy the thing. It's an ideological thing with them too. They've always hated government like this. They've always hated the government. They've always hated the mechanism, the architecture of the government. They've always hated it. So they treat it with the kind of contempt and disdain that they've always felt about it. But what's especially dangerous is that these Heritage Foundation sons of bitches are allowing Trump to cozy up to America's greatest adversaries. They're allowing Trump to basically break decades of alliances that have kept America safe. They're allowing Trump to exact his petty revenge and retribution against people who talk shit about him, who he fouls disrespected, because that serves as a distraction for them while they dismantle and destroy the federal government architecture, the administrative state that they've always wanted to do. He's a useful distraction for them as they go in there and do this. And Doge is the tip of the spear where that's concerned. That guy joking about cutting off Social Security, that is infuriating. That is pure fuckery. But what Trump is doing on the world stage, basically weakening NATO, allowing the slaughter of Palestinians, right? And destroying, like, basically wanting to give up Ukraine on a silver platter to Russia, right? Picking fights with Mexico, picking fights with Canada, all this bullshit about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, talking about he wants to take Greenland. That is a distraction. Yes, it's problematic. It's destabilized the world, but it's a fucking distraction to what these people really want to do here. It's still a fucking distraction. These people hate the administrative state. These people are hard right ideologues who hate the administrative state. They've always disdained the federal workforce, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the American public is right there with them. I know people that I work with who are good and decent people who feel that way about government workers. And there's nothing I can really do to let them feel different, to talk them down. They want to, let's just see what they do. And they refuse, because they have disdain. They're overlooking the obvious untrustworthiness, the obvious phoniness, the obvious fakeness, the obvious theft that's going on, because they want the idea of scuttling the federal government, of, taking it to these and making these federal workers, disrupting the lives of these federal workers. They want that thing to happen so bad. They've always felt that way. So they're willing to back up anyone who do they think is doing it. And they're willing to believe anything that entity that's doing it is saying, even though they shouldn't, even though it's obvious that they shouldn't. But you see, this is the thing. This is a long-term right-wing coup against this place. They have let people feel that the federal government is no good, the federal government does no good, and that people that work in the federal government are just sitting on their asses, don't do anything there. They're incompetent. They wouldn't survive a day in the private sector. Steve Bannon had a video where he was bragging about, oh, you guys think you're safe, well, we're gonna kick your asses out. They're gonna kick your ass. We're gonna gut Washington D.C. You ain't doing shit there anymore. You think you're safe? Fuck you. We're taking you out of there. They are bragging. They're loving this. And a lot of Americans feel the same way. And that's because the right wing has been allowed for decades to do that shit. And I'm sorry, Democrats, you're as much to blame too. You provided the vacuum for them to go into. You push back. You never push back at all. Considering this shit a culture war, stuff that you didn't want to get into. Did you think you were above? You let Ronald Reagan inseminate that within the American zeitgeist with no counter. You let Republicans run with see that shit over and over again with no counter. And now, this is what we got.
The way that they win is we retreat, and we're not going to retreat. We're not going to surrender. We're not going to quit. Fight, fight, fight.
Okay, why are so many people Trump voters, and why do they feel so displaced and disenfranchised by minorities? It's because they are being displaced and disenfranchised. It's just not by minorities, it's by America, right? And this is the reason we know who J.D. Vance is because he wrote a memoir to try to show this. And it happened to come out just after the first Trump election, but sort of showing like the disenfranchisement and the displacement of small town America. And here's the reality. Small town America is dying. The world is changing. There are less than 1,000 farming families in the country, right? And in the summer of 2020, my little family got stuck in an RV driving around the country because we were supposed to be traveling the world, and then COVID. Okay. And I've written about this in Un-American, which is my video book that you can access on my Patreon, a whole book that I wrote about whiteness and power and privilege and myself and my crazy stories. And we ended up driving backwards across the Lewis and Clark Trail from Seattle to Washington, D.C. Okay. And in that drive, you could see it, right? You could see, first of all, we saw no Black people from the time we left Seattle till the time we hit Chicago, right? Very, very white. And the towns are dying. The jobs are going away. The Army recruiting stations are some of the only ways to get out of there. And this is what happens when huge shifts in the world happen. In Culting of America, I'm arguing that one of the reasons we've switched back from trusting bureaucracy and experts to charismatic leaders is because we lived through an apocalypse, which was the industrial age running smack into the information age and leaving nothing untouched. And so right now, all of these disenfranchised white people, especially the men, are very scared and very angry. And so when an idiot comes in, a digit, and tells them that immigrants are the reason and trans people are the reason and gives them someone to hate, they fall for it. But they fall for it because somebody did screw them over, right? The country, the leadership of the country, and changing times. And there's this little piece about white men and why they are so angry. And it's because they were born 50 years too late. And this is exactly my ex-husband, who I had to testify against to be kicked out of the military as a white supremacist a decade after I left him, and is the reason why I wrote Un-American. And it's the same as J.D. Vance, as all these people. If they were born 50 years ago, it would have been good enough. It was good enough to just be a mediocre white man. And they're trying to do that again, right? And it's so funny because I always hear people saying, like, if more of the pie for other people doesn't mean less of the pie for you. Yes, it does. I don't think you understand how pie works, right? It's not enough to be a mediocre white man when you have to compete with everyone else and everyone else who's had to be better than you the whole time. And so they are PO'd. Just like we look back in the day 50 years ago and say, man, our grandmothers were screwed 50, 75 years ago. They look back and they say, fudge, why can't I have what my grandfather had, which is just only working 8 hours a day and having a personal slave at home in my kitchen, raising my children, and everything in the world just bowing for me, right? So very complicated. Some of it is legitimate. Again, their way of life is dying. And when the world shifts, the people in the margins usually die, right? So they're pissed. They're scared. They're watching the American dream evaporate just like everybody else. And by the way, I want to be very clear that I am in no way defending them or the decision to vote for Trump. They are being abused and manipulated by a narcissistic cult leader who's giving them a place to focus their fear and something they can do about it. And this is what cults do. They come in, they weaponize your discontent that already exists. This is why some sort of gratitude practice can be really good to keep you out of cults. Right? They weaponize your discontent that already exists, and then they promise you that their way, their method, make America great again, is going to fix everything. The promise of the cult is always a lie. Right? So no validity, no justification to these people for believing it. They have fallen for a cult. They are being conned. It's not true. And it's not okay to all of the minorities and everybody else. I'm just saying this is why it's happening. This is what we are seeing. And the other thing is, like, him wrecking the country is going to affect them too. So what you voted for. The promise of the cult is always a lie. It's always just about power and labor. I'm Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. I wrote a book called Uncultured, which you can't get on here right now because it is sold out, but it's on Spotify side of the subscription side of Spotify, so you can listen to it for free. I recorded it myself, and it was recommended twice in the New York Times. My book, by the way, is the blue corollary to J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy. I'm the blue J.D. Vance. I realized after the election, which is to say, the veteran that has a memoir out explaining to the world what happened. His was, this is why angry white men voted for Trump, and mine is, your family's in a cult. Check out Uncultured.
This first 100 days of the Trump administration will go down in history as the greatest grift in the history of our economy in terms of the amount of money stolen and the size of it over the shortest period. Just some data here. Trump-affiliated entities have made at least $300 million in trading fees. The Trump family's net worth has increased by $3 billion or $1 billion a month since he took office. Just some timeline. The Trump coin launched on a Friday night under cover of dark with all the news about the inauguration. By 3 a.m. on Sunday, it was valued at more than $70 billion, and there were a small number of investors who made large investments on a Friday. Maybe they got a tip or something. They made tens, if not hundreds of millions, and then over the course of the next couple weeks, about 800,000 smaller investors lost billions. This market manipulation, this what would technically be called insider trading by the SEC, we'll never know because on April 8th, Trump's deputy attorney general ordered the DOJ's crypto fraud investigation arm to disband. Trump posted on Truth Social, "This is a great time to buy Donald Trump media at 9:37 a.m. Between 1 and 1:10 p.m., there was a huge increase in bullish zero-day S&P 500 call options. And then just 8 minutes later, Trump announced a 90-day pause on all of his tariffs, and the market soared almost 10%, one of the biggest one-day gains in history. So someone knew what was going on.
Of course they do. He calls them.
That's called insider trading. The market gained $4 trillion while Trump media closed up 23%, increased his net worth by $415 million. On April 23rd, Trump announced that the top holders of the Trump coin would win an exclusive dinner with him, and the coin surged over 60%. Just 58 wallets made more than 10 million apiece, totaling approximately 1.1 billion in gains. Meanwhile, 800,000 wallets of mostly smaller holders have lost money on their Trump coin. And it gets worse. Now the kids run on it. World Liberty Financial, a crypto firm run by Trump's sons, Eric and Don Jr., and they are entitled to 75% of its revenue. And now it's being leveraged to facilitate pardons for criminals. Justin's son, a crypto billionaire, was under SEC investigation for securities fraud after investing $75 million in World Liberty Financial. Guess what, Kara? The SEC dismissed his case. This is what fucking infuriates me. I'm a realpolitik guy. I don't mind a little bit of corruption as long as it's good for all Americans. I don't mind a little bit of strong arming. But here's the problem, or the tragedy. If Trump brought half the competence, expertise, and elegance to governance as he does to grifting, the country would be in a much better place. We have a mob family running the country. That's the bad news. The worst thing is that Michael Corleone is managing the crime and Fredo is managing the government. You are so good at stealing. Can you bring some of that elegance, that expertise to the government?
I did not realize how critical the federal government has been with building the Black middle class until this commenter pointed it out a few videos ago. So thank you, Queen of Palmettos. I made a video about the class implications of this, and I want to extend the conversation to race. I'm Dr. Anna Kalschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and I research the unwritten rules of work for people from working class backgrounds, as well as intersections with race, gender, and neurodivergence. I've worked in public, private, and academic sectors, including 4 federal agencies. And after this commenter pointed this out, I did look into, are there more people of color in the government? And it has been found that the government does hire more Black people than the private sector typically has. Of course, there are industry exceptions. You can always find an exception. Just like there are winged birds that don't fly, there's always an exception. However, something I will say is that the number one employer of people in my field typically has been the federal government, especially the military. And the reason being that there are implications for making mistakes with hiring that the government typically takes more seriously than corporate. Corporate thinks very short term. So for example, a lot of the studies on should women be in combat and what were the criteria for that were done by IO psychologists. These studies looked at how much weight somebody needed to carry to be able to lift up the average sized man in his uniform with his weapons, and could they carry them appropriately? Because dragging somebody across the field, that's a landmine risk. You got to be able to pick them up properly and carry them out. And exercises like that were how they determined if you can do this, regardless of your gender, then you can qualify for being in whatever part of the military. I believe that was for being on the front lines. So these are the types of things that IO psychologists do. And when I was entering my first federal agency, I remember they presented me, I was surprised to see a competency model, which looked at what are the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics that are needed to do the job. What does the agency value? And here are the performance criteria we've made from it. And this is what good performance is. This is what bad performance is. This is what great performance is. And it's very hard to get great performance. And I was impressed because in my experience with corporate and academic, I had never seen anything like that. Y'all want to know some tea? Academics are some of the most hypocritical about this stuff, talking about reducing bias and does the research on what is good for hiring and doesn't practice it at all within the academy, even IO psychology programs. There's not a universal hiring across the Fed. It depends by agency, but it is typically better, in my experience, in seeing that than corporate, which a lot of it is go with your gut, similar to academia. And because there's so much work on bias reduction, I could see that absolutely being why more Black people have thrived in the federal government. And to be clear, the only people who are given bonus points when they apply, even with affirmative action, the only people given bonus points when they apply to a federal job are veterans and disabled people. You do get extra points on your application if you have a medically documented disability, or if you are a veteran, especially a disabled veteran. There are no extra points for being a person of color, a woman, anything else. The purpose of all of these systems is not to let unqualified, underrepresented groups in. The purpose is to not let underqualified people who are part of the majority in because of the bias. Regardless of what happens with the federal government and the employees there, I think this is a good example of why hiring using evidence-based techniques matters, and how it does make for hiring people more based on merit than identity. And if you don't think that's true, if you don't think it's possible that Black people are more qualified to do things than is typically represented in corporate, then you need to ask yourself why you assume they are not qualified.
Well, as the Trump administration cracks down on DEI programs, some federal workers are telling NBC News that they are being personally targeted after a website published names, photos, and public information on what's being called a DEI watch list. A third-party website not affiliated with the government has been circulated in private group chats of public health employees across multiple agencies. The site accuses employees of what it calls DEI offenses, like working on diversity and equity initiatives. The website says it's a project of the American Accountability Foundation, a conservative watchdog group. NBC News health and medical reporter Berkeley Lovelace is with us to talk more about this. He's reported on this story. He joins me now. Berkeley, that conservative watchdog group that we're talking about and the Department of Health and Human Services have not responded to our request for comment, right? But what more do we know? Can you explain more about this website and what are workers telling you?
Yeah, right now it's really unclear when this website first appeared. The website lists mostly Black employees who work within the Department of Health and Human Services. And so after speaking with sources, I can say that workers are pretty terrified right now. The website lists a number of, quote, offenses that these workers made, including working in DEI initiatives, donating to Democrats, and using pronouns in their bios. It also lists their personal information, such as photos and their salaries. At one point, the list had a headline that said, quote, targets, but that language was changed on the website shortly after we published our story, and we blurred out the images of those workers to protect their identities. A person we spoke with said this is clear racism and basically a scare tactic to try to intimidate these people from doing their jobs. So right now we're out to the group that appears to be behind this list, as well as HHS, and we're still waiting to hear back on this.
And beyond this, the Trump administration, Berkeley, has made a bunch of changes within the Department of Health and Human Services. What exactly is happening, and how could it impact people, around the country?
Yeah, so this comes after a pretty bruising week for public health care workers. So late last month, the Trump administration directed employees at HHS and other agencies to end any activities or jobs related to DEI and to turn in coworkers who didn't follow those orders. So there's also been a communications blackout where workers were not allowed to communicate with outside groups or with each other. And so there's some concerns about this, especially because we're in the middle of a pretty heavy flu season. There's also concerns around bird flu. But all in all, workers we've spoken with said they're pretty committed to doing their jobs right now.
Berkeley Lovelace, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I've been sitting with this article for the past couple of days, and it finally clicked. Let's read and comprehend together. Black Enterprise. April jobs report. Black women lost 106,000 extra jobs, most among all workers. I think this sister is comprehending the impact of this. But again, let's take it a step further. Reading and comprehension, one builds on the other, right? 1 month, April 2025. Not only did Black women lose jobs on par with the other demographics in the workforce, an additional 106,000 Black women lost jobs, most among all workers. So not just 106,000 Black women lost jobs, no, over and above all the other demographics. So I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down.
Just to drill down, these people, these Peter Thiels of the world, the Musks, and these right-wingers, they resent that the common rabble, that a segment of the common rabble, lowly, regular folks, have such stability and have such safety within a work environment. They do not like unions for that, and they resent the hell out of the federal workforce for that. They resent it. They don't think that these common folks deserve that kind of stuff. And the regular public, we are such, we're so, and the regular public, we resent that too. If I don't have it, why should they have it? Instead of saying, if they have it, maybe I should have it too. And that is the crux of what is going on. They resent the stability that regular folks have in the federal government.
This video is really just to myself. being a federal employee now is just rough. I have to take the silence so that I don't cry. Just all in my face, my eyes. Just every day. It's like a 10-round fight with Mike Tyson of all boxes. It's rough. I just had to leave for the day. I don't think I could have sat there another second. With almost 18 years, it's like you can't just leave. You know, you've been there too long to just walk away, but not long enough to walk away. It's rough. And usually you can see the bright light, the end of the tunnel. It's like the footprints in the sand point. Part of me is like, God, why hast thou forsaken me? But to know God is to believe God. And I know God. Just in this moment. It's just rough. It's like I want to hit the stop button because I never want to be the one to cry on the internet. But it's the pain. My family doesn't deserve the suffering. In your quiet time, just say a prayer for federal workers, for everybody, because every industry is being affected, unjustly affected. And it's rough. It's raining, so I can't even go to my ice cream truck today, which kind of gives me joy to see the children and the innocence of them. Yeah. It's rough. It's really rough. So, just be kind to somebody. Each other. You don't really know what the other person is going through or suffering through. But you don't need to know just to be kind to somebody. And to all the federal workers that's still there, that's kind of in the boat like I am, you know, hang in there. I just can't believe God brought us this far just to leave us. Not here. Not now. Wow. Hang in there, everybody.
So, I lost my job today. Been working for the federal government for over 20 years. I didn't vote for this. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm 50. I'll be 51 this year. nobody's going to hire me. It's age discrimination. They took the DEI out, so I'm not a protected status anymore. I don't even know how to fill out these new applications online. Have you guys seen that? Everything's online. And they offered us 8 months of paid leave, but we didn't think it was real. Like, we thought you guys were going to protect us because we voted for humanity. I mean, every time they've done any kind of assessment on me, I've gotten bonuses, I've gotten paid vacation time, I've got pay raises. I do a great job. I don't deserve this. If you've watched this far, I'm just mimicking everything I've heard about these federal employees losing their jobs. Guess what? You work for us. And a lot of us don't appreciate you trying to guilt us because you were offered 8 months buyout package. I mean, when my husband was laid off 3 months ago, he showed up for work, worked that day, and got a pink slip on a Wednesday. That's it. No payday for Thursday or Friday. Go get a new job. No warning, no nothing. That is the reality of when you get laid off. You know that private insurance that you have that you're not explaining to all these people feeling sorry for you? Did you guys know that federal employees get a totally different type of insurance than everybody else in America stuck on Obamacare? Yeah, research that for a second. Not to mention they can retire after 20 years with a full retirement and Social Security. I'm sorry, we don't feel bad for you. We know most of you are paid actors from the CIA and the left mainstream media, and you're not fooling the rest of us. Americans, do better. Do better. The federal employee is like the biggest industry in America. That says a lot. We voted for smaller government. We voted for accountability with how you're spending our tax dollars. And I'm sorry. We just don't care.
So as I've said on here before and other places, that state government jobs, city government jobs, and federal government jobs are the largest employers of black people. Actually, college, institutional jobs are the largest employers of black people across this country. So, in a sense, the Heritage Foundation, which you all need to remember, that's a white supremacist organization, okay? They are related to the Federalist Society, which, again, is white supremacist. They never liked black people getting anything. They don't like to see black people comfortable. They like to see black people struggling. They like to see black people fighting for every little bit they get. So, when we say in the community, yo, go on and get you a good government job, good stable government job. A lot of black people get the government job and they relax and they rest. They think, okay, good, I'm stable, I got some financial stability. These people have been waiting for their chance to rip that up. Now, they're targeting us really with this, with all these workers they're firing. But, you know, they're targeting us because they have made it known in the public that the face of government workers are black people. But the majority of government workers, by a long shot, are white people, in particularly white women. So they did all this to disrupt us, mainly. They're always targeting us. White supremacy always targets black people. But they have loathing for the lower classes too. They have loathing for the middle class, lower middle class, and even upper middle class. They loathe them too. So they decided they're gonna call everybody, you know, just on GP. But the target is black people. Those same people were the ones who started insinuating into the public zeitgeist, especially when black people got the right to use certain things like Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, especially after the 1960 Civil Rights Acts and affirmative action came about. They are the ones that started plotting and planning from since then to dismantle those things because they felt, okay, this has got to stop. The Negroes are getting access to this stuff now. No, these things have to go. That's why now when black people got access to public education, a lot of these public education colleges all of a sudden had their funding cut. And some colleges all of a sudden went private. Again, white supremacy always targets us to lock us out of it. They don't like to see us getting anything. Drained pool politics, as my friend Fortress loves to say. So it's, don't get it twisted, my people. All of this disruption still is targeting us. Everything's still fucking racist. The unions now are under renewed assault because unions were forced to integrate. They didn't like that. They didn't like to see black people being able to get a certain standard of living, just like white people have had for generations. That's always been a problem. I'm telling you, man, this is why I talk about the way white people express their whiteness. The particular way that most white people express their whiteness is a very specifically targeted avarice, specifically targeted kind of what we call bad-mindedness. You know? It's like it gets in the white identity's craw to see black people prospering because in some kind of way that rises above or colors outside of the so-called line of proximity to whiteness that white people have always demanded that black people stay under. And so these Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation folks and all of these people, they know how to trigger that sort of collective subconscious racist backlash in white people. Because white people only seem to they only seem to understand, that kind of whiteness, the kind of whiteness that's eternally anti-black. Anti-black at all costs. Meaning if they have to die to make sure that black people get kept back, if they have to destroy everything they depend on to make sure black people get kept back, that expression of whiteness seems to be the only type of whiteness that most white people know how to live in. This is the reason we can't get anything nice. This is the reason we keep having large swaths of the society vote against their own best interests, because they can't guarantee that black people will get locked out anymore. It's as simple as that. You can't guarantee that we will get locked out anymore. Unfortunately, for a lot of white people, the laws of this country and the interpretation of the laws over the centuries have made it so that you cannot legally and constitutionally lock black people out of any and all benefits that come from this society anymore. Therefore, many of you have resolved over and over again over history to burn it all down, just for the perception that black people are being reinterred under you, no matter the cost to yourselves. Just as long as they get hurt, just as long as the black people get hurt. I mean, they throw in the LGBTQ and the aspirant whites, to keep them in check, to let them know you ain't never gonna be white. But believe you me, the main target has always been black people. And this is why, when we were talking to y'all behinds last year prior to the election, we were beseeching you guys to fucking listen. But no one did. Even the other non-white groups didn't listen to us. Everything's still racist, man. Everything's still racist.
Lift me up.
You're learning so many important things, and I'm so proud of you.
You know, it's the deception that bothers me. The deception is cruel. I mean, from the moment they wrote the words, "We the people," leaders in the United States have relentlessly sought ways to subvert democracy in America. They've sought ways for outwitting their own founding documents for over 200 years. Even in the Constitution itself, you know, it provides for elections, and then it imposes mechanisms that render those elections pointless. The separation of powers, you know, the checks and balance system. Well, whose power is being checked? Elected power. The power of the elected representatives of the electorate. Nobody checks the Supreme Court, for example. That's really the supreme branch of the U.S. government, the Supreme Court. And those are lifetime positions. The framers of the Constitution seem to be primarily dedicated to creating a system that would ensure maximum inefficiency. Because the Founding Fathers were, as we know, deeply suspicious of government itself. I mean, think about it. No taxation without representation. That was the slogan. Well, that could go a different way. No representation, no taxation. If you asked Americans today, if you ask most Americans today, which would you rather have? Your whole paycheck or your senator? What do you think they would choose? Which do you think they would feel is more useful to them? Their full salary or their congressperson? Their congressperson who is completely subservient to his or her campaign donors and to whatever corporate sector they want to enter once they leave office. Their congressperson who listens and obeys lobbyists more than they'll ever listen to their constituents. I mean, the entire political platform for any candidate is calculatedly drafted to serve the interests of whatever business sector they're going to target for campaign funding. That's why they put the policies that they do or the proposals that they do. Elections in the U.S. are like talent shows. Just like those shows where the audience votes for whoever sings the best, so that then they'll win a recording contract or something like that with a major producer. It's the same thing. You elect a politician, you know, whoever sings the best, so that then that politician can win lucrative deals with business. It's got nothing to do with your interests. You pay a higher percentage of taxes, in fact, than corporations, but corporations have a higher degree of representation than you do. I mean, according to what's called the Citizens United decision, that was in 2010, corporations have personhood status under the law, except it's a super personhood status because they're larger than life. Corporations have the right to free speech under this ruling, and that speech includes political campaign funding. So literally money talks. The rule says that it would be an unfair restriction on corporations' right to freedom of speech to limit how much money they can spend to get whatever they want from politicians. Freedom and democracy. You see? They come up with every possible way to shut you out. And who do you suppose made that Citizens United decision? Well, it was the Supreme Court. I mean, look at education, at higher education in the United States. A functioning democracy requires an informed and educated public. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. He said that a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. So what can you deduce might be the objective when you make education prohibitively expensive? when you set up a system to restrict access to education for the citizenry and make it only accessible for the rich? Well, that's a recipe for tyranny, according to one of your own founding fathers, but that's what you're doing. I mean, my mother was still paying off her student loans when she was in her 70s. And you keep finding new ways to discourage people from going to university. It's not enough that you expect an 18 or 20-year-old to come up with more money than it takes to buy a house just to be able to get a degree. That's not enough. So you have to start creating useless degrees, useless so-called disciplines, degrees in electronic feminist activism, degrees in navel gazing, so that you can then start to say, well, university is really pointless. As if there aren't still degrees available in the sciences, in law, in business, in history, in the fundamental disciplines. You make people think that university is all just a joke. You set up all of these absurd degree programs to make university look like it's pointless. So why bother? Everyone thinks, just why bother? Why should I go into debt just to get a useless degree? Meanwhile, the children of the elite are still going to university because they're the ones who are on track to be the managers of society. They're on track to rule you. I mean, why do you think that they didn't allow slaves to learn to read in the South? The same reason that they don't want you to be educated, because you're serfs. The U.S. is looking to revive domestic manufacturing. They want to bring back offshore factory jobs back to the U.S. They want you to be on an assembly line. They don't want you to have a lot of big ambitions about your future. They don't want you to have the intellectual tools for self-sufficiency or critical thought so that you can actually see and recognize and understand what your society really is. Everything about the society is calculated to marginalize the population. And one of the main instruments that they use to marginalize the population is the constant repetition about how free and how democratic it is. It's quite telling that for any other country in the world, if you want to learn about it, if you want to understand it, if you want to really know that society, you have to go there. You have to live there. You have to mix with the people. You have to experience it. But with America, it's different. People outside of the U.S. understand it and know it far better than Americans do. And if Americans want to actually learn about and understand their country, they would have to leave the U.S. They would have to go outside the U.S. to educate themselves about it. You would have to go outside of the U.S. to learn what America really is. Thomas Jefferson's defense against tyranny has been and is being systematically repressed in the United States. So you tell me what kind of a system that means it is. For security reasons, the government gets to watch you online. They get to know everything that you're doing. But for the same security reasons, you're not allowed to watch them online. You're not allowed to know what they're doing. All the CCTV cameras are pointed at you. All the surveillance systems are pointed at you. Meanwhile, your so-called public servants have more privacy than you do. What kind of a servant has more privacy and more rights than their supervisor? I mean, isn't that supposed to be the relationship? Politicians and bureaucrats, state workers, they're public servants, right? But can you monitor what Senator so-and-so is doing on the internet? Can you listen in when Congressman such and such meets with his donors, meets with his financiers, his funders, with businessmen? I mean, what's on Joe Biden's browser history? He can find out what's on yours. Why can't you know what's on his? And more importantly, the real power players are completely off the radar. The CEOs, the shareholders, the oligarchs, the people who have by far the most power over the conditions of everyday life for people in America and around the world, the people who have the most power over government policy, they're not even acknowledged as having that power. The real controllers of the society are completely obscured and unscrutinized and unaccountable, except to each other. That's the system. It just self-identifies as democratic.
In the CIA, we didn't give a hoot about democracy. I mean, it was fine if a government was elected and would cooperate with us, but if it didn't, then democracy didn't mean a thing to us. And I don't think it means a thing today. The true goal of the United States government is control. And they feel that if the United States did not control, then somebody else would. And the principle of government by the people, for the people, of the people, that's just silly.
And what I'm wondering is if you see today Elon Musk being part, for instance, of Trump's administration, or Trump just being in the White House as maybe the logical next step of corporations further invading or replacing a government.
Right. Well, you have to make a differentiation between corporatists and oligarchs. They're not the same. The slashing of tax rates, the moving of manufacturing bases overseas, places like Mexico, China, etc., enriched corporations. And they also created a very powerful oligarchic class worth hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't know what's Bezos, 180 billion or something. And oligarchs and corporatists, they're both capitalists, but they don't want exactly the same thing.
Can I stop you for one moment? Did you mention Bezos?
Yeah.
Why is Bezos connected to, why is Amazon connected to what you were just describing? Maybe I missed something.
Well, he's an oligarch. So what oligarchs make their money off of rentier capitalism. They don't actually produce anything, they set up toll booths. So Amazon doesn't make anything, but if you want anything, you got to pay Amazon to get it. That's rentier capitalism. Whereas if GM, they make cars. So GM used to make cars in Anderson, Indiana, and in America, the Farewell Tour, I write out of Anderson. They're big, gigantic, weed-choked lots surrounded by cyclone fencing because they move the plants to Mexico, literally truck them up and move them. And you had about 25,000 unionized workers in Anderson who were making, roughly with benefits, about $50 an hour, and they pay $3 an hour in Monterrey, Mexico, without any benefits at all. That's corporations. So corporations want things like stable trade deals, because they will make an investment, and it could take a while for them to seek a return. That's corporations. Oligarchs, and so they want a certain amount of stability. They want a certain amount of decorum. Figures like Obama, figures like Biden, at least, while he was sentient. Oligarchs want chaos. They want the system to be destroyed, because the more it's destroyed, the more for vital services. I mean, that's why they're destroying the Department of Education. Everything becomes privatized. And in order to get essential services, and this is the horror of our for-profit healthcare industry, you've got to go through these oligarchs in order to get it. Facebook, all what Yanis Varoufakis calls techno feudalism. So I looked at the last election as one between corporatists, who were backing the Democrats, and oligarchs, who were backing Trump. And the oligarchs won, and they're doing what oligarchs do, which is dismantling the administrative state to create a system whereby our most basic needs, I mean, it's already happened in many cities, the privatization of water, the privatization of sewer systems, the privatization of parking authority, everything becomes a way to extract. It's extractive. And the services decline, of course. I mean, that's why they want to privatize the postal service, which they did in the UK. If you look at the UK postal service, it's a disaster. They don't deliver to rural areas. Now they'll only deliver in some places to boxes. People have to come in and get their mail. The mail gets lost. Because it's not about sustaining a civil society and providing basic services to the society. It's extractive. And so the oligarchs won. And Musk that's what he's doing. He's destroying everything, and what they intend to do is essentially cast aside the most vulnerable, to increase the fear and anxiety among the precariat, who don't have stable jobs, don't have job protection, because they're more easily exploited. And that's what all of this is about. It's also a window into the collapse of the structures of the democratic state, which were already very anemic and in decline. But, for instance, Congress, which is, we have our elections are just legalized bribery. I mean, you get a candidate, they go in, the lobbyists write the legislation. But Congress, which has the power of the purse, the power to control spending, is completely abrogated. control, and what you're watching is the slashing of basic services, and then Congress people who support Trump can call Musk up and say, well, don't cut this Social Security office or whatever it is in my district, and they restore it. Whereas the Democrats are reduced to kind of writing angry and memos or something, or press releases, but have no power. Well, that's a system of patronage. That's how dictatorships or authoritarian regimes work. And so, yeah, we're very far down the road towards a kind of American fascism. I mean, we're barreling towards it with the usual inability on the part of a bankrupt liberal class to put up roadblocks and stop it.
I'm curious about this point about the privatization of the Postal Service, just because one often hears that it's government organizations that are the most bloated and inefficient, and the post office, in my experience, does not do as well as FedEx or UPS. And at least facially, what I hear Musk claiming is that they're trying to get rid of this government bloat and excess.
Well, that's garbage. I mean, if you lived in rural Montana, you wouldn't say that. Because in remote areas, FedEx won't pick up.
Oh, really?
Oh, no. I mean, they're going to drive 4 hours out to your ranch to get something. What they will do, I mean, let's remember what they've done to the Postal Service, that they borrowed from the pension funds to drive it into economic distress. So it's always, and they're doing that right now to Social Security. They will create a system, or they will essentially devour, cannibalize a system so that it becomes dysfunctional, and then use that as the excuse to privatize it. But take a good look at the UK Postal Service if you want to see what a privatized postal service looks like. It's a disaster. A postal service is about giving the postal ability to the citizenry in the same way that our public school system is about educating children regardless of where they are, or if it functions well, even what income level they're at. That's not true in the United States because it is driven by property taxes. So what you're doing is taking the most basic services that we pay for. We pay for them, not Musk. We pay them with our tax dollars. And if you want to talk about the most bloated, unaccountable government agency, that's the Pentagon. They haven't been audited in 10 years, the waste and fraud, and you sign contracts with Boeing or whoever it is, and you have cost overruns, and they're all guaranteed, and then the weapon systems don't work. It's the military, which consumes half of all discretionary spending. And when Arnold Toynbee writes about his book about the collapse of civilizations, he cites a rampant, unaccountable, uncontrollable militarism as the death knell of all civilizations, which was true, and I studied classics, which was true, of course, with Rome and Greece, and ancient Greece.
This question might be tangential. I'm not sure. But as I was combing through your Substack, I found some articles on the deep state. And I'm admitting to this, I hear people mention the deep state all the time, but I am pretty unclear on what it is, and it's probably something that I should have looked into much more a long time ago. But I do hear the deep state used in connection often with the Pentagon. So maybe before we continue, I could just ask, because I think it is relevant to Trump, just what exactly is the deep state? What are the myths that maybe irresponsible conspiracy theorists might lobby about with it? But what is it actually?
Well, in that sense, the right, when they talk about the deep state, is not wrong. There is a deep state. It is built around largely the intelligence agencies, secret black budgets, which even Congress doesn't know about.
And which you're very confident still exist. So it's not conspiracy theories to talk about it.
No, we know. There's I think $100 billion that goes towards black budgets. And if you look it up, we don't even know where the money goes. And the military in the United States is a state within a state. No congressperson can vote against appropriations. In fact, every time they put a bill that even under the Biden administration, they pay them more. I think the last was when they gave them $40 billion more than they even asked for, because they've set up The only thing we make anymore in America largely are weapons. And they've set up plants all throughout the country, so it becomes an issue of employment. You can't close the F-35 plant in Vermont because these people go to... So that the deep state is any institution within the state that is beyond control. And I think the intelligence agencies are beyond control, certainly the CIA, but we have 16 intelligence agencies. Military is beyond control. Yeah, that's the deep state.
And it's largely, you said, this like $100 billion going to...
Well, it's more than that. If you count the Pentagon budget, it's $1 trillion.
$1 trillion.
Well, the Pentagon's what we spend on defense.
Mm-hmm.
Defense, weaponry.
What is, I guess when I said irresponsible conspiracy theorists, and maybe I'm totally wrong here too, but I have in mind people talking about reptilians or Illuminati in the deep state. But
well, I mean, you know, when systems of information shut down, when you live in societies dominated by secrecy, I've lived in these societies, then conspiracy theories run rampant. Because people are searching for explanations about what's happening, and because the press is shut down, there's no kind of rational explanation for what's happening. Conspiracy theories are, you know, and that was true in every kind of totalitarian country that I covered, whether it was in the Middle East or Latin America or anywhere else. So that's what happens when they're right about the secrecy, and then they make guesses, often which are, or they seek to construct narratives, often which are fantastical, but they're looking for narratives to explain what's happening to them. I mean, that was certainly true with the Christian right. I spent 2 years with the Christian right, and they were searching for conspiracy theories to explain their own immiseration, their own dislocation, you know, the suffering that they endured within their communities, their de-industrialized communities.
so you said we know that this money is going to the deep state, but we don't know. I mean, the question then is, what sorts of things are they doing with this money? I guess by definition, we don't know exactly what they're doing, but what sorts of things might they be doing with it?
Well, they build both an international and a domestic apparatus of internal security. I mean, wholesale surveillance. That's what Edward Snowden exposed. Or Bill Binney, who wrote Trailblazer, and he wrote that kind of program to monitor people suspected of being involved in groups that would carry out terrorism, and they immediately seized upon it and used it to surveil all of us. You know, leaks, because of Snowden, because of WikiLeaks, we know we have glimpses, you know, the backdoor capabilities they have, so that if we think our phone is turned off, it's not really turned on. It's not fake, that's all real. And totalitarian societies, I covered East Germany, the Stasi state of East Germany, it's always about wholesale surveillance. And as Hannah Arendt writes, people say, well, I didn't do anything wrong, so I shouldn't worry. Well, that's to misread what's happening, because where they collect data on you, and we're the most monitored, watched, photographed, surveilled population in human history. They have all that data, and then the moment they want to criminalize you, they can. And that's what, you know, Stalinism did. That's what any totalitarian state does. So after that exposure, this was under Obama, that Snowden made, nobody rolled it back. So we have glimpses. We know what they're doing. I mean, we're assuming they're ICE agents, as are taking these students off the streets with student visas from foreign countries. And with the video of the tough students who was seized, it's an unmarked car. They're in unmarked clothes. Their faces are covered. We're not even sure what agency they're from. And she's handcuffed, bundled in a car and taken away. Well, I used to watch that kind of stuff on the streets of Santiago under the regime of Augusto Pinochet. That's how those countries work.
I didn't see this Tufts video. When?
Yeah, it was just a few days ago. It's a video of a woman who, I think she was Turkish, a PhD student at Tufts. And she was coming to her home for Ramadan, I think, for the iftar, and they grabbed her.
And nobody knows what's happened to her?
Maybe they do. I mean, you know,
somebody ostensibly does, but the
they all
public
seem
doesn't.
to end up in Louisiana. Why? Because of course the judicial system there is amenable to sending all of these people. You know, when you start revoking visas, when you start arresting people with green cards, it's a very short step towards grabbing people with citizens with passports. Very short, which I expect to happen very soon.
Even as I was just having this conversation with Rick a couple of hours ago now, as I ask him, what are some parallels between Trump and Hitler? In the back of my mind, I'm wondering, can I even publish this anymore, or am I just targeting myself for something in the next few years?
No, right now, that you're going to get crucified over the genocide. They've weaponized it's not anti-Semitism to criticize Israel, of course, but they've weaponized that as a kind of way, as just a substitute to go after kind of leftism, you know.
But for citizens too at this point?
In this sense that those students who are citizens within the universities have been expelled, suspended, put on probation. Professors have been, and administrators have been expelled, suspended, and put on probation. So they haven't been stripped of their passports, but they've been essentially punished or criminalized for free speech. I mean, I live in Princeton, and Ruha Benjamin, a very highly regarded academic, is teaching on probation. And then you have Catherine Franke, this, you know, very important legal scholar who spoke out against the repression against the students and the assault by veterans of the IDF, who were students at Columbia. They used some kind of a toxic chemical to spray protesters, and they ended up in the hospital. She spoke out against that. After 25 years, she's pushed out of Columbia Law School. And within the legal profession, Franke is a huge, huge figure. So you creep towards totalitarianism. That was true with the fascists in Germany. It was true under Stalinism. Solzhenitsyn writes about it. It's a process. And by the time you're shackled, you realize you're shackled, it's too late.
Yeah, I don't know how law schools work, but I assume that there's tenure in law schools too, right?
Probably. I don't know. I would assume so, but
I wonder how she was pushed out. I'm sure that there are ways that universities have of exerting pressure on people. They don't want to be there, even if they have tenure, but I'm curious.
Sure. I don't know the specifics of it. I just know she was pushed out after 25 years.
Returning, though, to the deep state, you mentioned that Congress doesn't even have access to what's going on.
Well, Feinstein, after it was exposed that there was torture being carried out in CIA-run black sites, she tried to do a Senate investigation, and they intimidated her staff. They hacked into her computers, and she came out and gave a press conference completely ashen and said, "You can't hold these people." I'm paraphrasing. I remember the exact quote, but you know, you can't. These people are unaccountable. We can't hold them accountable. So, I mean, there's an example again of the deep state. You can't, if you cross that line, it becomes dangerous. I mean, Robert Kennedy, I'm not a conspiracy theorist on the assassination of JFK, but Robert Kennedy, till the day he was assassinated, believed the CIA had a hand in the execution and the assassination of his brother. And then there's pretty good evidence. There was, and I'm going to draw a blank on his name, but there's an old CIA director, I want to say McCoy, but I can't remember, who after he retired, became very critical of the CIA and then died in a boating accident or something. So we know from the history, whether it's COINTELPRO, the kinds of stuff the FBI did against activists, or the information that came out about, you know, the torture techniques. It was all done at McGill University, how to break people down psychologically, the use of LSD and I mean, Steve Kinzer wrote a book called Poisoner in Chief about the guy who was in charge of kind of creating the poisons and the hallucinogenics for the CIA. So we have glimpses in the past of how they operate, and they certainly have, they're no different today. Yeah.
Well, the reason that I just brought up Congress not knowing what's happening behind these budgets is I wanted to ask what relationship Donald Trump might have to the deep state and why it's interesting, and then also what it is that the quote-unquote right-wing conspiracy theorists that you mentioned earlier said they're not really conspiracy theorists in this case, maybe at all.
Well, they are in terms of QAnon and this kind of stuff. But they're not wrong about the existence of the deep state. They have, created their own kind of theories about how it works, and many of which I find fantastical. But they're not wrong about the deep state, and Donald Trump is terrified of the deep state because the deep state is hostile. How do we know? Because every former intelligence head, Clapper or military, as soon as they retired, they could not be on CNN fast enough accusing Trump of being a Russian asset, which was a fiction, of course. And the New York Times slogged that thing for 2 years, and both the New York Times and the Washington Post won Pulitzers based on unsubstantiated garbage. So all fascist regimes rise to power by promising to clean out the rot of the state, to drain the swamp, so to speak. They're not wrong about the swamp. That was true in Weimar Germany, which was a morass of corruption and anti-democratic, but it's what they replace it with. So what he replaces it with is people who are personally loyal to him. And that's what's dangerous when you have all sorts of unconstitutional measures being carried out, including the the seizure and attempt to deport green card holders. These are legal residents in our country. When the Justice Department is personally loyal to Trump, then there's no enforcement mechanism. So how do you stop these judicial abuses when the Justice Department has lost all independence at all? But again, I don't want to somehow pretend that pre-Trump these institutions were not rotten and corrupt. They were. And that's what, when I talked about a bankrupt liberalism, that's what I meant. That the anger towards the dishonesty and the corruption and the fact that they would, for 2 years, go after Trump on the fiction that he was a Russian asset, exposes the the rot within those institutions. But all totalitarian regimes which promise to clean out that rot replace it with something worse, and that's what's happening. I mean, these people are even more corrupt than the people they're replacing, who are pretty corrupt.
The people from the deep state who are being...
No, they're purging the deep state.
Right, I'm saying the people who are being purged from the deep state are being replaced with people who are more corrupt.
Yeah, of course they are.
Mm. But you are also in opposition to there being a deep state.
Yeah, I believe in transparency.
Right. So
accountability. I believe that I'm a journalist. I don't, I have seen that when power abrogates itself to itself the ability to operate in darkness, abuses proliferate. I know. I have spent my whole life covering and writing about it.
Right, but so I guess in this case, the deep state is the lesser evil. You would almost rather than remain.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I would say that the deep state gave us Trump. I mean, a dysfunctional system gave us Trump. I blame the Democratic Party and the ruling class for Trump. In a functioning open society, Trump would not even be a viable candidate. But because the system seized up, and democratic institutions were seized by the billionaire class to serve exclusively their interests, it gave us Trump. That it's not new. I mean, this has been going on. It was true in Yugoslavia. It was It's true when any society breaks down.
There's something that I'm not understanding. You said that the deep state gave us Trump. You said that the Democratic Party and the ruling elites gave us Trump, but the deep state is also, you also characterize it as it can't be controlled and it's hostile and it's not these people. So they both independently contributed to Trump, or you're saying that in concert?
No, it's because they can't be controlled, because of their abuse of power, and which generated a legitimate frustration and anger among the populace that you make a Trump possible in that sense. They don't want Trump. They don't like Trump. And that's why Trump is going after him. But, if you look at any society, for instance, I covered Iran, 1979, the Iranian Revolution, they immediately purged the quote-unquote deep state or the bureaucratic state of the Shah and put in their own people. That was true after the Russian Revolution. That was true in 1933 when the Nazis took. That's what always happens. And but the world is a complicated place, and the charges that oftentimes these people make against the old bureaucratic state is not wrong. The Savak, which was the Shah's secret police, was savage. Just savage and brutal and murderous. It's what comes later. When that society essentially is reconstituted to serve a particular person or a particular ideology, it's not better, and that's what's happening. But the deep state itself was awful, and the breakdown of our democratic institutions is real and is awful. None of that's fiction.
You mentioned, and this is a change of subject, I don't think maybe it's tangential, but you said that you spent 2 years with the Christian, right? And what did that entail, spending 2 years with them?
Well, I'm a reporter, so what did it entail? I went to their mega churches. I took evangelism explosion seminars with D. James Kennedy. I went to Right to Life weekends.
What's an evangelism explosion seminar?
D. James Kennedy used to be a really big far right, and it teaches you how to. It was kind of fascinating. It teaches you how to recruit people into the mega church, And they were quite open about preying on people who had just gotten divorced, just lost their job, just lost a spouse, were new in the neighborhood. It was kind of cynical in a way, but you have to go on the inside to understand what these institutions are. I'm also a divinity school graduate. I grew up in the church, so I'm biblically literate, and I was acutely aware of how they were misusing the Bible, which is why my book's called American Fascists. I saw them as an authentically fascist movement.
Why, among other things, of course, a war reporter, was this a job that you wanted to spend 2 years of your life working on?
Well, I wasn't a war reporter anymore, and I had been pushed out of journalism because of my public critiques of Bush's call to invade Iraq.
But what was it in particular? Just your interest in divinity, or?
Yeah, I grew up in the church. My father was a minister. My mother was a seminary graduate. And I was frustrated with the liberal church for not calling these people out for who they are. They're heretics. They have sacralized the worst aspects of American imperialism, white supremacy, capitalism. It's a complete anathema to the biblical message. This is why they focus so much on Paul rather than the Gospels. But there's something that I knew a lot about and that I was interested in as a movement in understanding. And I love reporting anyway. I love it because you get out, you carry all sorts of assumptions that often get shattered. I come out of the kind of left-wing religious social gospel movement. My father, who was a World War II vet, he was in North Africa, but he was in the anti-war movement, Vietnam, civil rights movement, and in very outspoken for gay rights at a time when that was very unpopular, especially with the church. And so I had a kind of disdain for these people, but you can't listen to their stories without, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to feel for what they went through. I mean, the evictions, the struggle with substance abuse, the domestic violence, and which are all, we talked about Durkheim, all attendant to societal breakdown. And I actually, the first chapter in the book is called Despair. And all totalitarian movements are drawn from this despair. That's what Fritz Stern in The Politics of Cultural Despair writes about. That's what Hannah Arendt writes about, both of them refugees from Nazi Germany. And it's and you have in these mega churches, and I think Trump does this, you prey on that despair. So the mega church pastors who make fabulous sums of money in the same way that Trump made money from a sham university or his casinos or anything else, it's preying on this despair. So I came away, although I think the movement's dangerous, and I think it is fascist, and I think that ideology fills the ideological void. I don't think Trump has any other than, if it's transactional, he just wants to make money. But it's filling that ideological void. And many of the figures, both in the first administration and the second, come out of that movement. But I looked at most of the adherents as victims. Yeah. And that was because I spent time with them. And while I disliked the megachurch pastors immensely, James Dobson and these figures who I really thought were very cynical, and I didn't necessarily dislike the people, their congregants.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but are you a Presbyterian minister?
I am. I don't advertise that too much, but I am ordained, yes.
Am I right that you became a minister so that you could work in prisons?
Not quite. So after I lost my job at the New York Times, and I was given a reprimand, I was told I was not allowed to speak about the war in Iraq, and I refused, and so I left the paper.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
So, and I'd been
That's pretty insane that a paper would do that.
Well, I was the Middle East bureau chief of the New York Times. I spent 7 years in the Middle East, including a lot of time in Iraq. It wasn't an active, I knew that this was, number one, I knew he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. And number two, I realized this was a debacle, going to be a fiasco, which of course it was. And I think all the Arabists did in the State Department, the CIA. I don't think there was any division between any of us. But you couldn't say it after 9/11, to say this kind of things. I mean, I come into my office at the New York Times and my phone was filled with death threats, and there weren't more because they'd run out of space. It was, for that moment in time, was to speak out against the war. Well, of course, I lost everything. I lost my salary, lost my health insurance, lost everything. And because I have friends in the church, they managed to get me health insurance through the church. And then the administrators of the Presbyterian Church said, well, at some point, he can't have it, he's not ordained. So I had done all the academic work to be ordained. And all I needed was to pass the 5 exams, which are about 3 hours each, roughly, including Greek. And I just went to the Princeton University Library and retaught myself everything I'd forgotten, took the exams and passed them, and then was ordained in an inner city church. I'd already been teaching in the prison, so I teach in the college degree program through Rutgers and have for a long time. And I invited the students of my families in the prison to come. We threw out the hymnals, got a blues band, and Dr. James Cone, the father of Black liberation theology, gave the sermon, and Cornel West spoke, but it was really geared towards mass incarceration. So that's how and it wasn't illegitimate. I mean, I look at that as a ministry. Most of my students are Muslim, and I'm not trying to bring them to Jesus, but I think the mass incarceration is a civil rights issue of our time. And I think we should be in those prisons doing everything we can for those people. We have the largest prison population in the world, 2.3 million people, I think, in the prisons, or roughly 2 million, 40% of whom never convicted of violent crime. And they know I never say it, but they know I'm a minister. And so, yeah, and it's on YouTube, so you can watch the ordination on YouTube.
Well, it's not every day that I have a Presbyterian minister and reporter who is embedded in the Christian right on the show. So I'm curious. I mean, this is getting a little bit far from the decline. Maybe it's not the decline of the American empire, but clearly Christianity is a very important part of your life and one that you value. Why is it so valuable, yet at the same time, this ostensibly Christian movement could be so dangerous?
I think they're heretics. I don't look at them as Christians. It's a political movement. I mean, they're all talking about family values and moral probity, and then they sign up for Trump. I mean, his life is just a train wreck of immorality and dishonesty. So I think that's evidence that it's primarily a political movement.
What is its goal as a political movement?
They want to create a quote-unquote Christian nation. But it's a theocratic state in the same way that Iran is a theocratic state. So they're philosophers. I mean, they lean a lot on Carl Schmitt, the Nazi jurist. They lean on Rousseau's John Rushdoony, who's a Nazi sympathizer. His Institutes of Biblical Law, which is pretty turgid, which I've read. They replicate the so-called German Christian Church, which was pro-Nazi. And that was driven home to me by my mentor at Harvard Divinity School, James Luther Adams, who was in Germany in 1935 and 1936 and dropped out of the University of Heidelberg to join the so-called Confessing Church, which was run by Niemöller and Bonhoeffer and these great resistance figures, until he was picked up by the Gestapo and expelled from Germany. And he's the first person I heard refer to the Christian right as Christian fascists. In the same way that I look at Netanyahu, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir as Jewish fascists. They come out, there's a fascist strain in America. The Ku Klux Klan is a fascist organization. We had all sorts of, in the 1930s, outliers, who were openly supported fascism in Europe. Same is true in Israeli society. You go back to Vladimir Jabotinsky, who Mussolini called a good fascist. That's a quote. And then Meir Kahane, who I covered, who was this fascistic rabbi. His Koch party was actually outlawed. Both Israel and the United States declared the Koch party a terrorist organization. The people who run Israel are now the heirs of Kahane. You had the Herut party, which Netanyahu's father comes out of, Ben Zion, which there was a letter published in the New York Times signed by Hannah Arendt and Sidney Hook and Albert Einstein, all these leading Jewish intellectuals who accused it of being fascist. So the strain has been there. The problem is that fascism is now ascendant, not just in Israeli society, not just in American society, but in Hungary, in Russia, in France, in Germany, the AfD. I mean, so this fascism. Robert Paxton wrote a book, Anatomy of Fascism, kind of good study of fascism. And he said, when fascism, when it returns, isn't going to come to American jackboots and swastikas. It will return with mass recitations of the Pledge of Allegiance and, the Christian cross. And that's right. Fascism, Italian fascism and German fascism are very different. Italian fascism, which did not have a very strong anti-Semitic strain to it, was all based on the glories of ancient Rome. German fascism was grounded in Teutonic myth. Fascism takes on a domestic kind of coloring. But I came away after 2 years in that movement convinced that it was a very dangerous fascistic political force, and I think I've been proven right.
What is it about what is happening in this movement specifically that leads you to label it as fascistic? What is the actual behavior that's happening?
It's based on a leadership cult. It glorifies white supremacy, quote unquote, patriotic education. It is calls for the death penalty. I mean, Rushdoony writes about how we won't need prisons because people who are recidivists will be executed. It is about inculcating, quote unquote, Christian values in education. It's essentially the calcification of the intellectual life and artistic life of the nation, which is what any totalitarian regime does. It is the belief that a figure like Trump is anointed by God. And that's what's that woman who's head of his now faith-based, the newly created faith-based, I think her name is White. I mean, she said any criticism of Trump is a criticism of God. Well, that's,
Wow.
let me tell you,
That's
that's
something.
Yeah, that's idolatry. That is the worst sin that any religious movement can make, to essentially sacralize temporal or political power. So, yeah, it's a very, very dangerous movement and not very well understood, I think, by people who are outside it.
One part of your response that I didn't understand, which I'm sure is just a failure on my part, is why advocating for the death penalty is fascistic.
Because a huge percentage of those people are innocent. Most of them are people of color, poor people of color. I mean, look at the work of Brian Stevenson in Alabama. Look at the Innocence Project. Look at the DNA testing. I teach in a prison. They don't get adequate legal representation at all.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the belief that somebody who is guilty should be killed.
I don't believe that the state has a right to commit murder any more than an individual has a right to commit murder. I mean, I've taught in the prison. I'm not romantic about the prison. I can tell you I've taught people should not be walking the streets. I've taught them. But I don't believe in killing them. And most of those people who should not be walking the streets, I would say it's a mental health issue. And they're dangerous. I'm not a prison abolitionist. But I don't believe in it. I mean, aside from the inhumanity of it, it's also the fact that if you're poor and vulnerable, you're often very likely to be innocent. And if you even do that once, but I just don't believe in the death penalty. I don't.
And is that because, really at the root of it, because of the 10 Commandments?
If you took the 10 Commandments literally, then you could never kill at all. And having been in Sarajevo during the war, where we were surrounded by trenches, and if the Bosnian Serbs broke through the trenches, we knew that a third of the city would be slaughtered and the rest would be driven into displacement and refugee camps. That wasn't conjecture. That's what happened to Vukovar and the Drina Vow. We knew. You didn't have discussions in the basements of Sarajevo because we were being pounded by shells about pacifism. It doesn't save you from the poison of violence. You're distorted and deformed by violence, even in a quote-unquote just cause. But there are moments when you are, such as Sarajevo would be a good example, you're facing your own annihilation, and you're not really given a choice. I mean, I would say that's true for the Palestinians. They've not been given a choice in that Israel has shut down any attempts to create a just and equitable settlement through peaceful means. I hate violence, and I actually know Hamas really well. I've spent a lot of time with Hamas, and I'm no huge fan of Hamas or any other violent movement. But it's the oppressor that determines the configurations of resistance by the oppressed.
I would like to, I hope it's okay that we've spent as much time as we have talking about religion. I think it's interesting. I have one last question that's more philosophical in nature. I mean, we've seen, you said you hate violence. We saw in the beginning of this conversation how deeply it has affected you and how much more deeply it's affected you than me or probably many of our American listeners, at least. And given that you are also a very religious man, I'm curious how you reconcile the problem of evil, which I take to be a very long and storied problem in theology. How can we have, or how could there be a perfect God when we live in this very terrible, in many ways, world?
Evil is a mystery. It's not a problem. And in war, when everything gets stripped down, you see almost the pure face of evil, but you also see incredible acts of goodness and kindness. Because to carry out an act of kindness in a war, especially when you reach out to the other who's demonized, is almost suicidal. There's almost a willful acceptance of self-sacrifice. And those stand in very, very stark relief, so that both good and evil almost become palpable. I mean, when the shells, so there was no running water in Sarajevo in individual dwellings. You had to go to what the UN had created, water collection sites or taps where people would line up and get water. Remember, we're being shelled 24 hours a day. And the Serbs would find out when the crowds were gathering at those and then bomb them and shell them. And we're talking about 90 millimeter tank rounds, 155 howitzers, I mean, really heavy stuff. And I've seen it. I mean, it's, the bodies are split in half and it's just awful. And so you almost had these waves of death emanating from these epicenters, but then you saw these families and friends frantically trying to reach out to friends and loved ones and there was these concentric waves of good and evil that are very real. So yeah, I mean, I think that I was close to the great radical priest Daniel Berrigan, who went to federal prison for burning draft records during the Vietnam War in Catonsville in Maryland. And I asked him to define faith. I said, how do you define faith? And he said, the belief that the good draws to it the good, even if empirically everything around you says otherwise. And I think having come out of conflicts and wars and distress situations, that's true. I mean, figures like Oscar Romero, I covered in El Salvador, Martin Luther King, these are figures that draw the good to the good. And yet, there's that old Christian adage that when you make a commitment as a Christian, it's called bearing the cross, and the cross is ultimately what they kill you on. If you read, I think David Garrow wrote a very fine biography of King called Bearing the Cross. King, like Malcolm X, at the end, they were very aware that it was over, that they weren't going to live very long. And yet they held fast to that kind of moral and spiritual imperative. I mean, essentially, they carried their cross. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that I would argue two of our greatest prophets were both deeply religious, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Because I think that when you confront radical evil at that level, which has the capacity not only to kill you, but almost probably will kill you, then you have a fealty to a world that, I don't like the word spiritual, but a world that is rooted in the sacred.
Speaking of evil, you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation when I asked you about America, the Farewell Tour, that sadism was something emblematic of the
sexual sadism.
Oh, sexual sadism.
Okay. Well, sadism, but particularly, I mean, we're a pornified culture.
Well, then maybe this isn't directly connected to
evil. By the way, this
anymore.
is where something I will agree with the Christian right on, and that I'm against.
This is now kind of a bit of a non sequitur from what we were speaking about, but why is this? Why is sexual sadism emblematic?
Because it's about turning human beings into objects. So I wrote a chapter out of kink.com in San Francisco, which is a BDSM community. At the time, they were housed in the old armory in the Mission District, and people could pay. They could call in, and literally women would be waterboarded. I mean, women, and I interviewed the women who were carrying out these acts, and they were beaten, and it was that sexual sadism is always a part of disintegrating societies. It's the eroticizing violence towards others, and particularly the vulnerable, and particularly women. I mean, I saw it in war. I mean, look, in war, the only thing that's produced in greater numbers than prostituted girls and women are corpses, because the men aren't there, the men are dead. And sexual violence is very much a part of war, too.
What is the connection, though, between the sexual sadism and the decline of empires?
Well, it's a breakdown. It's a breakdown of any communal solidarity, and it is a warped. It's a warped kind of desire in order to fill ecstatic needs by punishing, beating, abusing, degrading another.
In which empire, what evidence is there? I'm not suggesting that there isn't any, that it has been connected to decline.
Rome. You look at the last Caligula, Nero, all this kind of stuff.
What was happening then?
Well, it wasn't. I mean, Tiberius, throwing people off of cliffs and, terrible physical. I mean, there was actually, at one point, I can't remember which emperor it was, in the Colosseum, they reenacted the rape of Europa by the bull, and they put a woman inside a leather bowl and had the actual bull mount her and rip her apart. I mean, Rome was pretty awful.
How, if at all, do you see this issue of sadism, if not sexual sadism, as playing out in Israel and Palestine over the last 2 years?
Well, so you dehumanize the other, and then the other is not only are they less than you, but they have no actual worth. And they become, in the words of Israeli politicians, a human animal. I think that was Gantz who said that. But and then they get treated like animals. I mean, the Nazis did it. I mean, but it's a way of denying another's humanity, another person's worth, another person's right to exist. And that unleashes a kind of sadism. I mean, sadism was part of every war that I covered. I mean, sadism was, because when you can kill with impunity, it just becomes kind of boring just to kill. So like in Bosnia, I went into towns and saw where the Serbs had crucified Muslims on the sides of barns or split them open, or, I mean, even in the war in Salvador, the death squads would mutilate the bodies. I mean, they would cut off their genitals and put it in their mouth, and it's all sadistic. My uncle was in the South Pacific in World War II, and the Japanese were horrible, but so were the Americans. I mean, he carried out acts of sadism. I mean, he came home and drank himself to death, but sadism is very, very much a part of war, because war begins from the point of dehumanization of the other.
Because it's so difficult for a human to kill and harm other people while thinking of them as humans rather than objects?
Yeah, although you train killers, so you use operant conditioning, the same way you train a dog, repeatedly. So if you look at boot camp, it's about operant conditioning. It's about inculcating an instinctive response. That's how you create killers. I don't think most people have a natural tendency to kill. I think it has to be induced.
In the case of Israel and Palestine, do you see the war there and the sadism there as indicative of the United States' decline as well?
I would say it's more, well, yes, in the sense that if we defended international law, if we stood up for the Geneva Convention, we would not be arming Israel and sustaining the genocide with billions of dollars of weapons. We would have a no-fly zone out of Gaza. We would bring in humanitarian, if the rule of law mattered to us. So that breakdown of the rule of law is quite frightening, and it sends a message to the global South. Which is we have everything, and if you try and take it away from us, we'll kill you. And that's why there's been so much opposition with climate change and the rise of failed states and mass migrations, that tactic of open genocide. I mean, Gaza has now been shut off for 3 weeks. It's going to be mass starvation in an attempt probably successful by the Israelis to force the Palestinians out of Gaza. And we're sitting here watching it. And that has delivered an unequivocal message to the rest of the world. I mean, we may not see it, but we are pariahs. We are pariahs. Israel's a pariah in the eyes of almost every country on the planet. So in that sense, but I think that, in many ways, Israel's trajectory, which has become fascistic, is mirrored our own in a lot of ways.
How does the Christian right connect to Israel? Why are they in such support?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I think at their core, they're both fascistic movements. So I think that what the Christian right sees in Israel is a European-dominated settler colonial project that cares nothing for the rule of law and is making war on the darker peoples of the earth and Muslims. And that's very much the project that the Christian right embraces. It's about the return of white male patriarchy, of the eradication, that's the whole great replacement theory, which, Israel is terrified demographically if they were to create a unified state. Given the demographic numbers, it would very quickly, the Palestinians would outnumber the Israeli Jews. And I think that what they see, and I think you see the alt-right, the AfD and Orban and all these kind of fascistic type movements in Europe also ally with the Netanyahu government for exactly the same reason, that it's about the domination of, Euro-American or Euro settlers over others. And that is very, very much a part of the Christian right, that fear that they're going to be displaced.
The religious narrative about maybe a return to the homeland you see as just a cover for the...
By the Christian right?
Yes.
Well, you have to remember, what is their belief? Their belief is that according to the Bible, and look, there's a lot of stuff they believe that's not in the Bible. The rapture, for instance, is not in the Bible.
Rapture's not in the Bible?
No. They twist a part of Revelation, but the rapture's not in the Bible. Not the way Tim LaHaye describes it, others. So, floating naked up to heaven, that's not in the Bible. What they believe is that at the end times, before Christ returns, you have Armageddon and the Antichrist, and the Jews will dominate the Holy Land. But I think there's actually, I think it's 177,000, if I remember, will convert, and the rest will be annihilated. There's a deep anti-Semitic strain to the Christian right, but it is about the fulfillment of what, in their eyes, is biblical prophecy.
There is an irony here with anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And what is Trump's relationship to Israel? Is it just a continuation of the Biden administration? Is it significantly different? Is it similar?
It's not significantly. Rhetorically, it's different. So Biden would pay lip service to the two-state solution. Trump doesn't do that. In that sense, Trump's more honest. There's no secret within the centers of power, Democratic or Republican, what Israel's doing in Gaza and what its goals are. It's all completely. But Trump endorses it in a way publicly that Biden doesn't. He talks about the Riviera, turning it into a Riviera on the Mediterranean and stuff. Biden wouldn't do this, but at the same time, Biden was a full supporter of the genocidal project. And knew, or at least, I don't know how much Biden knew at the end, but certainly his administration, Blinken and others knew, and Blinken, it comes out of a very strong Zionist household, that the goal was ethnically cleansing. That's not a secret.
That seemed to be one of the major motives that you attributed to the Christian right, ethnic cleansing and white superiority. But I would have thought that for somebody like Biden or the contemporary mainstream Democratic Party that is in lockstep with him, it's more a global security, American dominance, securing our foothold in the Middle East sort of concern.
I can tell you, I spent 7 years in the Middle East, and the perpetuation of the genocide has not contributed to American security. It's destabilized the region tremendously. American allies, King Abdullah in Jordan, the Sisi government in Egypt are in tremendous trouble. If the Palestinians are ethnically cleansed, especially if they're pushed into the northern Sinai in Egypt or out of the West Bank into Jordan, I think those regimes will have a very hard time maintaining power. It has turned the Muslim world, 1.2 billion Muslims or something, against us, and it's going to create blowback. I mean, you can't decimate families on this level and not have blowback. And that worries me, because I think what will happen is you'll get something like a 9/11, and then Trump will seize on that to really shut down the last vestiges of our open society.